Now you're into this inside of the Citadel. You're going to move into Rotface's room generally first, because you're going to typically use Bloodlust on this fight. There's two main mechanics that have to be paid attention to by the range and melee. The first one is Mutated Infection. If you get Mutated Infection, you need to come out of the raid group when told to, either by the healers or based on positioning of the other tank. You will be cleansed. You will have a little ooze beating on you that you need to bring to another little ooze. Now this is depending on the strategy that the guild decides to go with. There's options to do little ooze to little ooze and big ooze to big ooze, which delays the time for an ooze explosion. However, and sometimes guilds will do during progress is just do little ooze to the nearest ooze, normally the big ooze, and just to ensure that people aren't dying to some of the base mechanics. The second mechanic that you'll notice is slime spray that the boss does. He will, from time to time, turn around and spew slime on the raid. It's best if you can position yourself where you can get out of this, but it generally should be healed through. The third mechanic that we'll see is the room is in quadrants. There's a slime pipe in each corner of the room, or each quadrant of the room, that'll fill up that quarter of the floor with slime. The slime will slow you and does damage. On heroic, it will eventually make you immobile. Hand of Freedom works on this. If you have to, bubble, ice block, anything to reset a damage or damage, those will work. Preferably not ever standing in those is the best option. On heroic, there is one additional mechanic added, which is Vile Gas. Vile Gas is typically a normal mechanic from Festergut, which I'll explain during that fight. But what happens is you're arranging to be separated between the two different rings, which I can show on the floor at some point. But the point is to be not within 6 yards of somebody else, because if you get Vile Gas, you will puke on people nearby, giving them Vile Gas and causing a chain reaction. Vile Gas does damage as it's there, and immunities and movement impairing effects do work to help remove that. However, it cannot be cleansed. If the big ooze that's in the room that we create with the small oozes reaches 5 stacks, it will do ooze explosion, which will make the ooze explode into multiple spots, and will target wherever the players were standing when it exploded. There's a delay between when it explodes and when the globules of ooze hit their position. So the key point is to not be standing where someone was standing. In pugs, the typical strategy is everyone just moves to one wall, gets just as far away from the boss as possible. However, there are different options such as Cloak of Shadows, Anti-Magic Shell. We can do some raid sacks, different cooldowns to lower the damage incoming. But ultimately, taking one of those or two of those slime globules to the face will kill you and will be a raid wiper. Rotface is a rinse and repeat fight. Doing those base mechanics will ensure simple clearing of the fight. Festergut, the brother to Rotface, has a few simple mechanics as well. The first one being vial gas, which I explained in the Rotface video. Vial gas means the range need to be spread out at least 6 yards apart from each player, preferably a little bit more, with ready to not be within range of somebody if need be. The heads-up gameplay on this fight is imperative, because if you start a chain reaction with vial gas, you could wipe their aid, or prevent healers from being able to heal the tank. The second mechanic is a lot more basic. It's inoculation. You're going to see 3 spores that come out in 25, 2 and 10. Traditionally, you make a triangle. You have 2 range camps and the melee camp. The melee camp stands directly under the boss's nuts, so that make sure the tanks become inoculated as well. You need to get 3 stacks of this during progression when we don't have the gear for ICC, because the damage when he does his main ability called Pungent Blight will kill you. That can be cloaked, but it's not a guarantee with cloak. It can be AMS'd during Pungent Blight, and ice blocked, bubbled. Any immunity will work to an extent. Relying on these to maximize DPS during progress might be important. However, if you can reach the inoculation camps, it's always preferred to move to an inoculation camp and get the spore, so that you are guaranteed not to die to the mechanic. On heroic, there's one additional mechanic added, and it's called Malleable Goo. It's depending on if you are colorblind or if you don't have a strong graphics card, that can be a real challenge for you. Your character will get a green ooze, no bigger than the swirly you get from TOC from getting the white or black buff, and it'll be under your feet in an orange gas-filled room. Moving out of this and getting 10 yards away from the splash point is important, otherwise your damaging or healing spells or melee attacks will be reduced by a massive percentage, lowering the amount of damage being done and potentially risking the group wiping. Although that is a heroic only mechanic, it will come into play on Professor Putricide, as it's one of his base mechanics. Professor Putricide is going to be the first encounter that's extremely difficult and requires a lot of personal responsibility. Pretty basic, straightforward fight when it comes to attacking a boss, but you add in the first real external mechanic when you include the Abomination. With the tank setup that we generally run, where we're running Benice and Samus, Samus on his DK, or even Benice and Death Kitten on his DK, it would be more beneficial to the raid to have the Paladin and the A-Bomb than the Death Knight, because the Death Knight, during later pulls, would be able to throw Hysteria on the A-Bomb. For the rest of the raid, there's a few mechanics that need to be avoided. We'll start with melee. Melee, there's choking gas bombs that will be spawned periodically throughout the fight, that if you detonate them or touch them, they will knock you back and make you reduce your hit rating to 0 for an extended period of time, about 15 seconds. Rogues, you can cloak this. Pallies, you can bubble this. Death Knights may even be able to AMS this. That I'm not sure. However, choking gas bombs will drastically reduce your damage. The ability similar to this for the range to avoid is Malleable Goo. Malleable Goo is a bounce tossed ability that's 3 globules of ooze thrown out of Professor Putricide, making a visual cue for the raider to be able to see. Malleable Goo, when it targets you, will bounce 3 times before it hits you. It gives you a time that if you have a larger distance between you and the boss, a longer time to react. If you are close to the boss, chances are you will get hit and or splash on other people. If you are targeted by more than one of them and you are hit, it will most likely kill you. Now onto the fun mechanics. The reason for the A-Bomb. There's going to be slime in the room that spawns that has to be sucked up by the A-Bomb, pressing the number 1 key. Meanwhile, the A-Bomb can be the maximum DPS in the raid, especially in early pulls, as long as it's attacking Professor Putricide, who should be tanked directly adjacent to the pool at all times. The reason for sucking up the slime, not only will it fill the room, but also there will be 2 different experiments that PP spawns. The first one is the green ooze that comes out, the volatile ooze. This will target one person and lock them in position after a period of time. This cast time for its acquiring can be slowed by a warlock putting Curse of Tongues on it. Depending on the positioning of the raid and the decision of the raid leader, there are 2 different ways to handle this. The first one is to stack under the green pipe when the ooze is supposed to come out, so the melee is already there and can easily cleave from the ooze onto PP and make a direct target. This works well, but can be an issue if you don't have a lot of melee, and because of the damage from the knockback. When it reaches its final destination or target, it will knock everyone back and do damage to them. The other option is when you do this strategy, you have the range move up by the table so that the melee have a target they can chase it to the same place and it's coming to the same direction, and all the range can work on nuking it as well. The mechanic's pretty simple. DPS that ooze, kill it, and switch back to the boss. The second ooze seems to be the raid wiper for a lot of pug groups because it involves personal responsibility. The gas cloud, as it's called, will target a random raid member and will fixate to them. If that player does not have any movement speed increases, it may eventually reach them and can be a real problem. If it reaches them, it's game over. The ways to avoid this are rocket boots, sprint, and even hand of protection if necessary. However, using hand of protection or bubble or ice block will make the target reacquire target and change directions. It's only advisable if we're doing the achievement or if it's a last resort. For this one, the raid should be fairly far away from the ooze when it spawns from the orange pipe, and should be immediately attacked by the ranged. Whoever it targets should then kite it toward PP so that it's going to intersect with where the melee is at currently, and so that the range can continue attacking it and make an easy transition from PP to the ooze or from the ooze back to PP. The melee will switch targets from PP, attack that as well, and killing the ooze before it reaches its target, theoretically. That's literally all of Phase 1 and Phase 2. He will transition at 80% and at 40 or 35%. In the final phase, at the final 35%, he no longer spawns oozes. The A-Bomb is despawned, and where it's more of a traditional soft enrage race. The tanks will get a stacking debuff that as they get more stacks of it, will do more damage to the raid. So it's ideal that the tanks will only take 3 stacks. In a perfect world, that's all we'll max out is 3 stacks per tank. However, there are some times where that's not going to happen, and this is where we have to have players that can either taunt and bubble, or hunter distracting shot and taunt the boss to them and put the turrets up, negating one of the stacks, buying us an additional 15 to 20 seconds. That may be a thing on progression. It will become a thing on heroic. It's a pretty common strategy. Those are all of the abilities for PP.